So yeah, things got pretty heated at that point. I have been asking about his religious education, like a billion times, and he keeps shutting me down. Then he just drops a bomb like that. I was still thinking he grew up with the Branch Davidians or on some other religious compound, and he says something completely rational that makes sense. I mean, the logic sounded reasonable, but only out of the context of what I come to expect from religious experts. Anyway, we argued back and forth a bit. I insisted he share more about his religious experience. He refused. He did agree to share 2 stories with me, under the condition that I cut them out of the timeline. I have his permission to share the stories. He just wants the audience to see the science storyline be finished before interjecting a religious component. So we pick up after we both calm down and continue discussing his journey through academia.
The first thing I did was go to a bookstore. This was way back when those still existed, and I searched the reference section for something that might help me get started on my journey for understanding. Thankfully, Jim Al-Khalili wrote the perfect book for me with the perfect title, Quantum, a guide for the perplexed. It consumed me. I probably went through it a dozen times, much to the chagrin of my wife. This was right around the time we were married. She has a picture of me, on our honeymoon, reading the book by the pool at our hotel in Hawaii. After that, I wanted to read every book about quantum physics I could get my hands on.
So you read everything you could find, and that's how you taught yourself what you know?
Nope. I wanted to, but didn't have the time. I still had college to finish. Did I mention I was working full-time? I don't think I did. I was a newlywed, working a full-time job and going to school full-time. I wanted to read every book I could get my hands on, but real life came first.
You had to have a process though, right? I mean, reading books doesn't seem like enough. How would you know if a book has been invalidated by another book?
That is a great insight. Yeah, I developed a process eventually. At first I was just blindly digging through reference material. Luckily, I was still in college learning about nuclear physics. For the most part, I did stop asking questions in class. There was one particular professor that I thought might be open to answering a crazy question or two. He was in the conference room, preparing for a seminar, when I got up the nerve to ask something that was bugging me from a modern physics lecture. Can I ask you a question about time dilation? I really want to understand this stuff, but I don't want to waste everyone's time in class if I'm just too stupid to understand it. Don't feel bad. Between you and me, I'm not sure if anybody understands this stuff. I can try to answer your question, but please understand that I'm by no means an expert on time dilation. As long as you don't yell at me, I'm happy to be able to ask the question. Yell at you for asking a question. I hope nobody is yelling at you for that. You might be surprised. When we talk about time dilation, are we saying the light that leaves the clock takes longer to reach my eyes because I'm going away from it? Like, the clock will appear to be going slower because the light can't reach me as it normally would. And if I reverse direction and go towards the clock, it will appear to be spinning faster. Is that all time dilation is? I think I understand your question. You want to know if time dilation is simply limited to our observations, or is there more to it? Is that what you're asking? Yes, that's it. We're not saying that I would actually age slower or faster, right? We're simply saying things appear to be going slower or faster. I know it is strange to think about, but things physically age faster and slower based on how fast they travel. If you really want to know more about the implications, learn more about pi mesons. They experience time dilation in a way that allows us to measure the effects. We age at different speeds based on how fast we travel. That's interesting. I will definitely take a look into pi mesons. Thanks so much for your help.
I think I need to stop you right here and say 2 things are bothering me about your stories. First, you always appear to have an amazing insight into science as soon as you were introduced to a new concept. And second, all of the teachers respond to you in the exact same way. I don't know, take another class. Is this all intentionally formulaic or what?
That is a fair criticism, I suppose. It is just a function of the constraints of human communication. You have no prior knowledge of my background, yet have observed some part of my behavior that compels you to learn more. I am telling you parts that I think are relevant and, as long as we stay within the agreed boundaries, you ask questions that I will answer. We should probably address your two concerns before going further with the discussion. From my perspective, this particular discussion with a professor was different in the best way possible. Before explaining the comment, it is probably better to explain how I formulated these profound insights over time, rather than on the spot in the classroom. Is that an agreeable strategy?
I suppose. I mean, I don't have a better suggestion.
You may recall two particular details about my childhood. First, we were very poor. Second, we were a working-class family. That meant most of my free time was spent doing manual labor, working in the garden, chopping firewood, stuff like that. My mind was free to wander. Very little of the things that occupied my time required intense focus. We would literally spend entire weekends shoveling goat manure from the neighborhood goat man into the bed of my uncle's truck for distribution as fertilizer amongst community farms. I spent hours imagining myself anywhere but there. As I got older, I simply incorporated things that bugged me, science included, into my thought space. In the Navy, I deployed multiple times on a nuclear submarine doing things I never did in places I never was. If there was ever time to do nothing but think about abstract concepts for insanely long periods of time, I can't imagine a better environment than deployment on a nuclear submarine. Realistically, I had probably spent a cumulative span of several years thinking about these concepts by the time I stepped foot into a college classroom.
Okay, so that explains your beef with Newton. But what about time dilation? Your whole premise of invalidated content is based on not being exposed to modern physics in public education. Time dilation is a modern concept, is it not?
It certainly is, but public education does not get credit for the exposure. Popular culture does. The one luxury item my parents would spend money on is television entertainment. Back in the day, we would rent a VCR from the video section of the grocery store. We eventually bought a VCR and rented movies. Eventually, my parents bought a digital satellite. I had not read many books growing up, but man, I watched a ton of movies.
About nuclear physics.
Actually, yeah, there was a horrible movie called Young Einstein. I say horrible because, as far as movies go, it was bad. But there were a few scenes that seemed to legitimately discuss Albert Einstein's theories. One particular scene stood out above everything else in the movie. The two main characters are walking and talking when they see a clock. The Einstein character explains time dilation in the way I presented it in my question. Basically, the character realized the light coming off the clock will appear to be moving faster or slower based on how fast he was moving relative to the clock. He essentially explained time dilation to be functionally equivalent to the Doppler effect. At least that is how I interpreted the scene. Anyway, I was feeling fairly confident going into the modern physics lecture that I already understood time dilation. After the professor introduced the twin paradox, I realized I was in way over my head. There was no way I could realistically teach myself quantum physics. I needed the help of experts. But the right experts, not just any old expert. Makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense now. You were bringing thoughts from your past into the classrooms, I get that. But I still do not understand why this particular response was amazing when all the other ones made you furious.
To be fair, this was the first question I asked where I was proactive about learning. In the past, I was expecting the teachers to simply answer any question I asked. So maybe that is one reason this answer sounded different to me. The main reason was he did not tell me to take another class. He told me about a specific thing I could study. And not just an abstract concept, but a physical phenomenon. I now had the two pieces necessary to truly understand a scientific concept, a theory and an observation.
Are you telling me you independently developed the scientific method? Is that your process? The reason you have no more questions about anything scientific is because you use the scientific method.
Slow down. You are jumping way too far ahead. It is impossible for me to convey the true meaning of why this particular insight from this particular professor was so valuable. Truth be told, I did not fully grasp the significance until at least a decade later. Maybe it is best to say it this way. I was hot on the trail of this scientific method, and without the internet, I very likely would have simply validated a methodology. Instead, I came to understand its limitations.
So now the scientific method is invalidated, too.
I never said invalidated. I said limited. I independently discovered the limitations of the scientific method.
What have I gotten myself into?